Hi, everybody. This is Laura Winterfeld.
And I'm Shannon Brock.
And we're here to share with you our Finger Lakes wines with Down Under wines. And we're going to be featuring 2 Rieslings and 2 Pinot Noirs. There they are. There they are. And this is all about kind of talking a little bit about Finger Lakes climate and aspects of its region, and comparing that to the regions of New Zealand and Australia. And we will taste together, and we will explore and talk about what are same as well as what is different. But first, I want to give a shout out to all those Cornellians out there. And Shannon is class of
99,
and I am class of 87 or 97, depending on which degree you want to talk about. So
and we also have people joining us who are have previously done virtual tastings with Laura through Experience the Finger Lakes, and we have some people who have previously done virtual tastings with me through Silver Thread Vineyards. So it's really neat to bring together these different groups who all love wine and love exploring to taste some wines together.
That's right. And a shout out to everyone who we met on Thursday at the Cornell Ithaca Cornell Club, where we got to talk about ourselves and tell you a little bit more about what we do through tasting. So
right. So I'm the co-owner at Silver Thread Vineyard, and I'm also a WSET, that's Wine and Spirit Education Trust diploma holder. So not only do I, my first love is Finger Lakes wines, but I love teaching people about wines from other parts of the world as well.
That's right. And actually, if we go back to when Shannon and I first met, when they started their winery 10 years ago, I knew Shannon because of her work over as Director of Education over at the New York Wine and Culinary Center, and now known as New York Kitchen. And when I saw that they had opened a winery, and I knew Paul was an amazing winemaker and Shannon was a great educator, I called them up and I'm like, we need to work together, because I knew that they would be all about sharing our love and learning about wine as well as tasting it. So that's what this is all about. This is about us liking to hang out together, spending way more time together than we probably should. And
especially today.
And we actually just finished a little while ago hosting this same tasting live here at Silver Thread. So people got to taste it with us, and we thought it'd be fun to do it virtually as well. And so that anyone who wanted to get these wines, and whenever you like, will be able to do this and kind of walk through them with us through this video. In fact, if you enjoy this, you can go to marketviewliquor.com, and they sell all 4 of these wines, and we will showcase each one so you know what they are. And if we piqued your interest into trying it, and yes, kids, do this at home, and do it another time on your own. So let's just jump right into it. What do you say?
Yeah, that sounds great. So we're starting with some Rieslings today, and we picked out well, it's great because Laura knows Silver Thread very well, and she was able to source some wines from Australia and New Zealand that not only are the same grape variety, but where the producers have things in common as far as how we like to grow our grapes and make our wine. So both of these Rieslings, the Silver Thread 2018 Estate Riesling Biointensive, and this, backwards. Okay, Grasset Alea Riesling 2019 from the Clare Valley of Australia. Both of these are relatively small production wineries, vineyards, and both of them grow grapes using, very natural, sustainable techniques. And I'm definitely excited about that.
So I guess we'll start by talking about the regional differences between Finger Lakes and Australia, because there's a lot of big differences in terms of what people perceive, but when you break it down, it's not as greatly different as you think it's going to be.
Right. So in the Finger Lakes, I'll start by talking about that. We are a cool continental climate, so we can count on the weather being warm but not too hot in the summertime when we're growing in the grapes, and into the early fall when the grapes are ripening. So cool weather is dominant here, and that makes it an ideal region for growing Riesling, which prefers a cooler climate, so that the beautiful, delicate flavors don't get overpowered by, you know, the ripeness levels getting too high. Another characteristic of the Finger Lakes is that we have what's called vintage variation. The weather is different from year to year. A winemaker in this region has to have a big bag of tricks and know how to make the wine, even when the characteristics of the fruit differ greatly from year to year. So we're tasting today a 2018, which was a cooler and very wet late season and fall. So it made it really challenging, but we were still able to make a really beautiful wine. Then we have other years like 2020 last year, beautiful, sunny, warm,
Almost drought conditions.
Almost drought conditions. It was actually really easy. Everything about the growing season was easy. We didn't have to worry too much, and we could pick the fruit when we wanted to.
That was nature's way of giving you a break with the middle of the pandemic, right?
It was really nice to have something go really well. But that's a big characteristic of the Finger Lakes is the weather being so different year to year, and the wines as a result, tasting very different from year to year. And I guess the third thing I would mention is just the soil in the Finger Lakes. We have glacial soil. Here at Silver Thread, it's dominated by shale, which is the sedimentary rock that's underneath everything in the Finger Lakes. We have a pretty shallow honey oil silt loam soil on top of that shale. So all of our wines tend to have a lot of minerality to them.
Right. So when we compare that to Australia, let's just kind of first look at this map and say this is just the bottom half of the continent, because above here, the rest of it is too hot to grow pretty much anything. In fact, can't even grow people up there. Not a lot of people live up that way. It's too hot. And so they need the benefit of the coastal influences. As you can see, all these colors are all the wine regions of Australia. And that's where all the grapes are coming from, because all the Southern Ocean here is cooling down the vineyards all along those shores. And so when we talk about the finest vineyards, we're talking about actually the most well-known and best region is up here. And this is actually called Southern Australia, although on the map it doesn't look that way, but that's because it's blown up. But it really is the southern part, middle southern of Australia. And this is one of the best known regions, producing lots of really small producers who are doing amazing things that are actually not too not the commercial ones. You know, your Yellowtail, the big larger commercial wineries are right here in the middle of the right there, and are producing more consistent kind of varieties that people like to drink at a value level. So Clare Valley is where this wine is from. The Grosset, and they have a bottle, please. Sure. So this Grosset is actually put Clare Valley Riesling on the map. Grosset decided to plant Riesling in the 1980s, I believe, and looked at the soils and said, I think this would be a really good place for Riesling because of some of the rock in the soil. Although it's not shale and limestone, they have this red rock that actually provides a similar kind of hard minerality that they thought would really give some power to Rieslings. But what Riesling really likes is cooler temperatures. So you're probably saying, well, this is Australia, and as far as I know, I thought it's really hot there. But yes, it is hot. It's hot in Clare Valley, but it's also up in the mountains. And so when you have a mountainous wine region, then what you have is just like if you've ever been camping, you'll know that it's going to be hot during the day in the summertime, but at night you better brought a nice warm sleeping bag because the temperature is going to drop in the mountains and it's going to get cold. And that, what they call the diurnal effect, is really important for regions like Australia, because in the evening, that cold temperature slows down the ripening, it slows down the whole growing process, and it retains acidity, which is really what is Riesling all about. Riesling is one of the highest acidic grapes there is, which makes it amazing for food pairing. We'll talk a little bit about food pairing in a little bit, but it's that structure, which is why you can get Rieslings all the way from bone dry, like the one that Shannon's going to be talking about today, all the way to Riesling ice wines, which are considered some of the most coveted dessert wines. And so it's all about that acidity. So Clare Valley has this mountainous region that allows the temperatures to come down and make really good Riesling. And
yeah, because normally I think of Australia as being a pretty warm area. You think of a lot of red wines. So I guess it's a matter of having these little valleys, the Clare and Eden Valley, that have just the right conditions for Riesling, because it's definitely a grape that prefers a cooler climate.
Right, and it really is. I mean, they're one of the two areas that really focus on Riesling as a white grape. While none of the other regions are going to play around with that, just because it's just too warm. The other thing that's really important in terms of similarities of these two wines is what's really cool is that when I knew I wanted to showcase the amazingness of Silver Thread, I needed to bring to a table a wine that's going to be comparable. And so, so this Grosset is, again, one of the original producers of Riesling, but this one, just like Shannon. So Shannon, you got that wine that you're talking about, got a 90 in Wine
Spectator.
Wine Spectator, which people think is some of the most coveted scores. And this one got a 90 in Wine Advocate, the Robert Parker Wine Advocate. So from quality point of view, we're talking about two amazing quality wines, which if you're going to compare side by side, you got to start there, making sure that the producers are on the same page in terms of what they're trying to achieve. The other thing is maybe talk a little bit about this whole, your goal is Silver Thread and it's and biosustainability, and also that's the goal of Grosset. Maybe talk about
right. Yeah. So it's very challenging in the Finger Lakes to grow grapes organically because we have so much rainfall and humidity throughout the growing season, and fungal disease pressure is difficult to control with organic practices. But there are a lot of newer techniques that we're using at Silver Thread involving bio controls for diseases. So I tell people it's sort of like if you eat yogurt or other fermented products to keep yourself healthy. It's almost like we're spraying yogurt on the vines in order to help boost their natural defenses to diseases. And I mentioned that 2018 that we're tasting today was a very rainy late part of the growing season, which to a lot of vineyards in the Finger Lakes was catastrophic. A lot of the conventionally farmed vineyards, the fruit just rotted off the vine. Wasn't known for being a great season, but at our vineyard where these grapes were grown, we had no disease at all. And we really attribute that to the biodefenses that we use in the vineyard, training the vines to be more resilient so that they were better able to fight off disease naturally. And just as an example of how that works, the skin on the Riesling, if any of you are familiar with grapes, you know, any of the grapes you buy in the store, you know that if you leave them in the fridge too long or out on the counter, they'll rot pretty quickly because the skins of grapes are pretty thin. They don't provide a lot of defense like, you know, the skin on an orange or even an apple does. But in the case of this Riesling, the skins were very thick, and that really helped protect the fruit from any of those fungal diseases infiltrating. So, you know, despite the challenging conditions, we had beautiful fruit to make wine out of. And I think it shows.
It definitely shows. And so in terms of the climate on the Australia side, they don't have to worry about the rain. There's, in fact, the growing season in Australia is a dry season. And so while there were issues, I think there was the issues where there were some fires going on in that year.
Oh, yeah. There has been a lot of that.
In 2019, that was the fire year. So that has its own set of issues. But in terms of rain, that's not their issue. And so they can make more consistent year after year, a similar consistency. But again, being an organic farm, that inherently is going to give varietal characteristics and differentiation.
And definitely one of the goals of farming this way, besides obviously caring for the environment, is that we believe, and I'm sure the wine growers at Grosset feel the same way, that if you are if you are growing the grapes more naturally, then the flavors will be more pure. And there actually have been some scientific studies social science studies where they do blind tastings of wines. And some of them are certified organic or biodynamic, some of them are not, and they have people taste them blind and rate the quality. And it's the wines that are made from organic and biodynamic grapes are consistently rated higher as higher quality. So that's really what we're after.
That's right. That nuance and something about, the harmony of biodynamic growing. And she's got chickens running around the yard right now. They're like, they hang out there.
Very holistic, very holistic. Just like my education at Cornell was interdisciplinary. You're kind of bringing all these different pieces together.
Absolutely. And so before we get into tasting, let's go ahead and make, as Shannon and I, as in our studies and what we do professionally, we go in there before we tasting with assumptions, things that we expect to be different, and qualities and characteristics that we expect these wines to have just by where they're from. Okay, so if we talk about these two wines in terms of which one will have more body, we would probably say that the Australian one, it's a hotter climate, it will have a little bit more alcohol. In fact, we know that because we can look at the bottles. This one is 12,
and the Silver Thread is 11.
And so,
11.
And so right now we know that just by definition, higher alcohol is going to give more mouthfeel to the wines. The other thing that we also know going in is that most dry Rieslings will typically have a little bit of residual sugar to balance out the high acid nature of the grape. And this special year, probably because of the cool and the rain, allowed Shannon and Paul to make a wine, a Riesling that had almost no sugar, residual sugar left in there.
It's bone dry.
And
it really had to do with the particular vineyard block and the way we were farming it, and the fact that fruit, it was so intact, like the integrity of the fruit was so high that we could leave it. We actually didn't harvest these grapes until November, which is very late. But they were just hanging so beautifully that we let them get absolutely as ripe as they would in a grape vintage, which most growers couldn't say in the Finger Lakes.
Right, and with even letting it hang, it's still only 11% alcohol because of this crazy 2018 that we had. So by definition, we expect there to be warmer climate, to be a little bit more body. In addition, this wine is not bone dry. This wine has, I think, around 7 grams of residual sugar. With not the Australian one. So it's not necessarily like, it's still considered a dry Riesling because most people will not taste that residual sugar. However, when it's tasted side by side, you might say, oh, this feels riper. You might describe it as riper flavors, not necessarily sweet, but juicier and riper. That comes from that little bit of extra residual sugar. In the same way that when you're making lemonade, you're going to add enough sugar to balance out the acids so that the lemonade tastes lemony as opposed to just too tart to even be able to enjoy. So that's why you tend to find some most Rieslings with some sort of residual sugar, and they had this wonderful unique situation that allowed them to get it down to pretty much nothing. So because there's a little bit of sugar in there, that also adds some body because it literally adds weight to the wine. So we know that. So we know that we have a wine that's going to have a little bit more body to one that will be a little leaner. And then the other thing we'll know about the regions is, again, the alcohol and that they're both Rieslings. So we expect them both to have a characteristic of a citrus-driven aromatics and flavors because it's a high acid wine. So Riesling tends to be drawn through lemons and limes, and sometimes some varieties will give off grapefruit. So let's kind of talk about just citrus off the start and see what we think. And so when I
say lemon, I definitely get lemon. This is the Silver Thread we're starting with, everybody.
And I also took lemon right off the top as being the driving fruit on this. This is not tons of fruit. This is not like when you think of Finger Lakes Riesling and you think of peaches and apricots and sometimes pineapple and pear. That's not this wine at all.
Right.
It's because of its very little residual sugar. It's very very, very directed, very, very linear. And so lemons it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think so. And on the palate, from a fruit perspective, lemon on the palate too. Touch a little bit of pear. I think there's a softness to it that has a roundness to it.
Yeah,
and
sort of creamy.
And then touch of lime on the finish, just a touch. That's kind of
Sure, yeah.
Why
Yeah.
not?
No, definitely. I mean, I'm with you in that it's not riper than that. It's not like
No.
peaches
No,
and
no stone fruits that we're getting
Right,
on this one,
right.
really.
Definitely citrusy.
Yeah, and in fact, why don't we actually just go and talk about fruit on this one?
Okay, sure.
So just to kind of compare it. So definitely smells riper.
Yep.
I
More
get-
like, it sort of reminds me of a lemon pie filling. So
Yep.
it's still lemon, but kind of a richer,
Yes.
more concentrated.
Yes,
type of
and
lemon.
I kind of wrote down yellow apple.
Yeah, absolutely. Like
a
a
lot more-
golden delicious.
Yeah, a very ripe yellow apple as opposed to a red apple
Or
and-
green apple.
or a
yeah.
green apple on the nose.
Yep.
And maybe touch of each, not a lot, but just a touch. Definitely
Yeah,
juicier.
Yeah, but I still say the lemon. I'm getting that lemon.
right.
But again, that lemon custardy,
Yeah.
like a rich.
Yeah, it's really interesting because lots of times when they talk about Riesling, especially Riesling like in Alsace, they talk about Riesling being very lime driven. But
Yeah.
these are definitely more lemon profile. I agree with you. And this one being more the citrus driven, this one maybe lemon with more tree fruit.
And someone said it best during our in-person tasting. She said, you can definitely tell they're both Riesling.
Yes.
They're
Yes.
super varietally correct.
Yep.
As far as the flavors.
These are sisters. One lives in New York, the other one lives in Australia, and they haven't talked to each other in maybe like a million years or something like that. So, but what's cool about these two wines, especially with the Silver Thread, is the other. And when we talk about other, we are talking about things that are not fruit.
Yep.
And that's why we love wine, because wine has tons of other, and then the geekiness comes out when we start talking about all that other. And when I tasted this before we got to, before we went live, and I tasted this Silver Thread Riesling, I was absolutely blown away by the herbaceousness of this. I mean, you have to taste this to experience it, because I can't tell you that it is like tons of thyme. I'm getting more basil now than I was before. Like really, and it's driven. It's like most Rieslings are driven by fruit. This Riesling is driven by herbs, right? I mean, it's like so much herbs, and then.
Well, I also get, we differ in this a little bit, but for me, this Riesling is very minerally, and on the nose, I get a lot of this pencil shaving graphite sort of aroma that comes out. So again, it's an other, but depending on your experience level with these different aromas, things are gonna come out at different volume levels for you.
And there's no question about the minerality on this. I mean, sometimes, minerality is hard to describe. I think this graphite thing going on is a classic way to do it. Often you could describe it as a salinic kind of thing, like
or possibly
saltiness.
I'm going to suggest one other idea, which is waxy. So there are certain aromas that we notice year after year in our wines from our estate vineyard. And one of those is sort of a beeswax flavor aroma. And I mentioned before about vintage variation and how, every year it's a little bit different, and we don't rest on our laurels and make the wine exactly the same year after year. But what we find is, despite the adjustments we make in the winery, we still get the same flavors that come through year after year. And so we attribute those to the vineyard and to the soil, and the growing conditions here at our site. And so the pencil shaving graphite and the waxiness are silver thread flavors. And Laura says here, and again, people are so suggestible with aromas. So she suggests that to me, and I say, oh yeah, that's there. But to be honest, before she pointed it out, I hadn't picked up on that. At least not a lot. Like other people said, oh, it's a little herbaceous. I hadn't tried to pinpoint exactly what it was.
I mean, that happens all the time, because the way all of our senses work, we save all of our sense of smell. Everything we smell in our lifetime gets stored in the middle of our brain in our hippocampus, and it's an instinctive thing. It's not a academic thing. And so basically our sense of smell is to protect us, right? So it's like, I smell something bad, walk the other way. I smell something good, I'm going to eat that, right? And so that's usually what's happening there in your hippocampus. When we start naming and using language, we have to bring it up here into our frontal lobe, and that requires training.
Yes. Yes.
And so it's very suggestible, but not in a way that I'm convincing you. It's just literally in a way that we're helping you bring it forward,
Right.
to apply language to something that you know, because that's the bottom line, is that you know what pencil shaving. Well, we were just talking
You
about.
probably smelled it before.
We know what pencil shavings smell like because we grew up using pencils. Now many young people are using mechanical pencils. They may never know what pencil shavings are, but the more you are the more you have experience with aromas, the easier you pick them up.
And that's why it doesn't matter, you know, your age or whether you think you're good at smelling or not. Everyone can improve.
Everyone can.
By practicing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
In fact, when I do these virtuals, there are sometimes when I'm asking people what citrus is, and someone says like immediately grapefruit right away.
Yeah.
I ask them, do you eat grapefruit every morning? And they like, actually I do, because grapefruit is one of those things that most people are last to pick up.
Yes.
Because they don't eat it as often, and they know it, but they don't think about it. Like
Right.
they think lemons and limes and things like that.
Right.
So it's very
Less common.
very
Just like if we were doing this tasting with people from another country, they would suggest different flavors,
fruits, right?
Different fruits, because what's common in the US is different from
That's
in
right.
other countries.
The British will say quince.
Yes, or gooseberry.
Gooseberry.
They'll say gooseberry instead
Right.
of lemon. They'll
Right.
say gooseberry, but most Americans are like,
I
what
have
is a
no-
gooseberry?
I have no idea what a gooseberry is.
Yeah. Well, in New Zealand, we're gonna come up on a New Zealand wine, but when my husband and I worked in New Zealand at a winery, they describe all of the Sauvignon Blanc as smelling like gooseberry. But they said, you know, for the wine we export to the United States, we change the description on the back label and we make it say lemon or citrus,
Right.
Because they know that Americans are going to see that gooseberry and
Say, what the
be
heck is that?
completely confused. Right. So I do notice too that, you know, some of that savoriness, that minerality really comes through on the finish of the
Yes.
Silver Thread. So I always tell people, make sure you pay attention to the aftertaste of your wine. People often overlook that or just don't stop and think about it, but it's a big key into the quality of, and just the quality and the character of the wine.
And to be honest with you, it's that finish is where I get those pencil shavings. Very clear in it. It's like really ends up with that graphite kind of flavor in your mouth.
Yes.
It's really very descriptive.
Sense of place. It brings you right back here to the Finger Lakes. You can feel like you're here. And that's what I like best about wine is, you know, it brings you to a different place.
It brings you like right to Silver Thread.
Right here.
Not
But
even
you know,
next door.
but even to people who are watching who maybe, you know, they know Ithaca and they've been in the gorges and they've tasted some Finger Lakes wine. It doesn't matter if it's our wine. It's still close enough. It brings you to the,
in fact,
because it's so different from this wine,
so different.
right?
It's so different. And what's interesting though, is that this is a very nice Riesling as well. Very different though, has, you know, much more. One of the guests said that this tasted more like a traditional Riesling in the Finger Lakes that they think of.
Interesting.
With a little bit more of that riper, more tasting fruit in terms of getting into the stone fruits and the apples. But
I guess I can see that. I don't know. I think,
but the distinctive thing.
Oh my gosh. So for me, whenever I smell an Australian Riesling, the first thing I notice is this sort of like rubbery petrol character. Petrol is the British way of saying gasoline, but
not gasoline like gas, but more oil.
Yes, oily. So that sort of oily, rubbery sort of aroma. And we know, again, through scientific studies at places like Cornell, that in the precursors for those petrol flavors are in Riesling. And when there's more sunshine on the grapes during the growing season, it brings out that petrol character sooner. So it's very common in an Australian Riesling, from the minute it's released, the minute it's bottled and released, you can get that aroma. For a wine like the Silver Thread, which was grown in a cloudy season, you wouldn't expect to see those petrol flavors until the wine is, 5 to 10 years old. So it will happen to every Riesling as it ages, but it won't happen as quickly if the grapes were grown in a cloudier year. So it's not a surprise at all for me. If someone gave these two wines to me blind and said, which is the Australian, which is the New York, I would absolutely pick the Australian one out immieately because of that
Yeah,
mineral, but in a rubbery, oily kind of way.
right, and petrol is very classic in Rieslings. You often see it more in aged Rieslings, and then of course the Australian is there as a young version. But as you age Riesling, it will get more less fruit driven and more mineral or petrol driven. And there are petrol heads like who just love that and think it's like, oh my God, I can't get enough. And there are other people who are kind of like, well, I'm not sure what I think about that.
Right.
And it's typically on the aromas only, not you don't taste the petrol in the palate. It's mostly on the in the aromatics. And
but I really love the structure of this wine.
Yeah.
Like it just has a nice fullness, but it still has that nice palate cleansing acidity. A lot of times when grapes are grown, especially Riesling, if it's in too hot of an area, they use a word called flabby to describe it, where it's just kind of flat.
Right.
And Riesling should always be very lively and very refreshing. So I love that this special area of Australia can really ripen the fruit, but still retain that nice balance.
Exactly. And another thing to note about this wine is that you can get that petrol in the Finger Lakes too. In fact, 2016, I remember very clearly we had the drought year.
Yep.
And there was a lot of sun, and there was a ton of sunburned Rieslings out there that year, where you got fresh Rieslings having that petrol right off the nose. And
right.
so
but it's not, I wouldn't say it's typical, but
not typical. No, because we're usually raining all the time, but not all the time. We can get
it rains throughout the growing season.
Right,
we like to say.
Right, that's right, throughout the growing season. So to summarize, we got a very mineral-driven, herbaceous wine that is really about that kind of like that savory aspect, which makes this unbelievable with anything you're going to cook with herbs. So. What was that one person that they said that I said, oh my God, Thanksgiving. That's right.
Yeah, with your stuffing.
Oh yeah. He goes, I want to have stuffing. That's right. He said, I want to have this with sage, with Thanksgiving dinner, with the stuffing. And we're like, oh my gosh, we're all going to go to his house for
How about, there's this famous Italian recipe, salt and bocca. It's either veal or you can do it with chicken, where you like pound it thin and you do layers of like your veal or your chicken, and then you have sage and prosciutto, and you wrap it and you like pan fry it, and that would be
so good because of the saltiness.
Yeah, the salty and the sage.
Oh, you got mineral. Oh, yeah.
The earthiness and the prosciutto would just be.
We haven't eaten since around 12, so we're like really thinking.
Can you tell?
We're definitely working up all the ideas.
And then with the Australian, I'm trying to think what I would do with this.
Well, depends on which way you want to go, right? Because Riesling is often nice when you want to have like lighten up something with cream in it. And like, for example, if you have, you can take, like I was saying earlier, like an Alfredo with a pasta with an Alfredo. And so I like Riesling with garlic because I think it does great.
I think garlic, there's enough acidity here. It could really help cut through the garlic and the lemon.
So I would think about that.
Even like a scampi, maybe like a shrimp scampi.
Let's do shrimp scampi. Oh, lemon, right? That's it. That's what we want. We want the shrimp scampi with lemon, herbs, and garlic.
Yes.
And we'll do that with that one. And that one would work really nicely, I think. I think this one will work really nicely too. But that's for you guys to test out and figure out for yourselves. So
both beautiful. We're off to a great start. 2 great wines.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some Pinot Noir. I don't know, this grape has become so much more popular than when I first started learning about wine. It was definitely like a wine geek wine, but now it's definitely hit the mainstream. So we have a
sideways.
We have a Silver Thread Pinot Noir 2017, and we have this. Oh, you got it too. There you go.
Okay, no problem. Your bottle's empty. Mine's full.
Yeah, both of these are empty.
Momo. So Momo is actually a cool brand that was created by an estate winery who wanted a livelier, fresher Pinot Noir. And so they came up with this with term Momo, which means something like extension or the next version of, and how do I pronounce the language?
Maori, or the native people of the indigenous people of New Zealand.
That's right. So let's talk about the color. You need some
Sure, yeah.
You need some?
Yeah. A little bit. Yeah. Here, let's do this.
I just opened it.
Okay. but I had the Momo. This is the
Oh, the Silver Thread.
So what I noticed about these
Sorry,
two.
didn't need to open this. Okay,
That's
never
okay.
mind. I'll drink it.
So one thing I'm noticing about the color between these two is they're quite similar. And I think it was true of the Rieslings as well.
Yes.
So sometimes, if you have like a Pinot Noir grown in a really warm region, it'll be a very deep color, possibly because there was a little blending that happened there. But I like that both of these Pinot Noirs are a pale ruby color, which is very appropriate for Pinot Noir. It is a thin-skinned grape.
You should always be able to take, it's really helpful. If you get like a Pinot Noir and a blind tasting, it's really exciting because you're done.
You know what it is.
You know what
right?
it is. Because
it could be a Beaujolais, I guess.
A Beaujolais, they're more purple, or it could be a Barolo, but then you taste it and you know immediately.
Right.
But when you look, you can literally put a piece of paper with words under it, like this one, and you could read. I mean, you could literally read the words right through the glasses because of the thinness. That is real Pinot Noir. I mean, Pinot Noir is from Burgundy originally. That's its home. So this is the color, whether you get it in Burgundy or Willamette or Australia or the Finger Lakes, you get this very low concentration color.
And it's a little heartbreaking. The grapes themselves, Pinot Noir grapes, Pinot means pine cone in French, and Noir means black. And I can tell you that the grapes themselves are black. They are so dark, but they actually lack an enzyme that helps fix that color to the juice. So when you first pick your Pinot Noir and you crush the grapes and you have it fermenting, it is dark. But then the color drops out and it becomes this more pale color. But just because it's lighter in color does not at all mean that it's light in flavor. It's actually got a very distinctive flavor. I can say, and many of you might have heard this, that Pinot Noir is a challenging grape to grow. The clusters themselves are very tightly compacted. So the berries, as they're ripening, they tend to push each other out of the way and break open some of those thin skins, and then fungal disease can get in. So when you're growing grapes here in the Finger Lakes, where it can be rainy and humid, or in New Zealand, where it can be rainy and humid during the end of the season, you have to be very careful with how you treat Pinot in the vineyard. At Silver Thread, we pick it by hand, and there's a tremendous amount of sorting that we do as we pick to sort out any berries that might have been compromised, because we don't want those in the finished wine, giving it some off flavor.
Right. Now, here's a fun fact to know. So if you get a Pinot Noir and you look at it and you can't read through it, and it tends to be more dark than it is ruby like this and translucent, then most likely, and it's completely legit for people to do this, is that most likely they added in, they blended in another grape that gave it some more color, because they wanted, because people don't always understand that just because it's lighter in color, that it can still have tremendous amount of flavor. So they might add in a little bit Syrah, a little bit Cabernet to darken the hue of the wine, and they could do that up to 25%.
In the United States. I'm not sure what the rules are for New Zealand, but I did work there.
You can't.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. Like when
100%. You can't.
When I went, when I worked in New Zealand, everything, the Pinot Noir was always 100%.
Yeah, no.
And here at Silver Thread, it's 100%. Right. But that's not the law everywhere.
Right. So the only reason I'm pointing that out is just so you know that if you get it, you'll see this in some warmer climates. You'll see Pinots that are darker, and that will mean that most likely there's just a mix in another grape in there, which is fine, but it just means that this is the color of Pinot Noir. And that's what you should know. And
like I said, just because it's lighter in color does not mean it's lighter in flavor. And I think both of these wines have some really beautiful aromas happening. And just like you mentioned, did you show your map? You want to show the map of New Zealand? So I mentioned before, Finger Lakes, cool continental climate, quite similar to Burgundy in a lot of ways, but New Zealand.
No, New Zealand is actually one of the most southern, this spot right down here, this wine region all by itself right here, it's called Central Otago. That is literally the most southern wine region in the entire world. And so right down here, not that far from here is Antarctica.
Right.
So it can get very cold very quickly. So Marlborough, which is where this wine is from, is right over here and is the most important growing region. And so when you're going up, you're taking advantage of a little bit more warmer, but you still got that nice cool temperatures, which makes that makes Pinot pretty happy because it likes a little cooler. And it makes the other grape that Marlborough is all about, which is Sauvignon Blanc, very, very happy, because Sauvignon Blanc is a high acid white wine and it needs a cooler climate. And so it is very happy in that spot in Marlborough. In fact, 60% of all the grapes that are grown in Marlborough is Sauvignon Blanc. The other 40% is Pinot Noir and around 8 other varieties, of which Pinot Noir is the second most planted in Marlborough, but still a fraction of what grows in Sauvignon, in terms of Sauvignon Blanc. Sauvignon Blanc is the it grape for New Zealand.
Right. Just like Riesling is the it grape for the Finger Lakes.
Right.
So in the pecking order in the Finger Lakes, Pinot Noir is probably similar to how it is in
Second place
Marlborough.
red.
It's the second place red. So Cabernet Franc is the most widely planted European red variety in the Finger Lakes. I don't know where it ranks in the total ranking, but probably not. I mean, there's not a lot of it. It's definitely kind of a labor of love in this region to make it.
And in New Zealand, it is the most produced red wine in New Zealand. So, but by far, New Zealand is all about Sauvignon Blanc.
And Marlborough is considered a cool climate as well, but the fact that it's right next to the ocean, right next to the Pacific, it's a maritime climate, whereas again, we're a cool continental climate, so it is warmer there. But unlike Australia, that doesn't get any rain during the growing season, in New Zealand, they do get rain throughout. So they have some of the same difficulties that we do as far as growing and ripening Pinot Noir consistently.
Right. In fact, the two regions are very similar. And I think they have a lot of similar qualities. I mean, right here, in terms of, let's talk about fruit first. And both wines for me are screaming out cherries.
Yes.
I mean, both, I mean, really, like, so the Silver Thread is definitely a red cherry, and very, very, both of them very ripe. I'm not getting sour cherry on the nose. I'm getting a very sense of ripeness. We had a lot of people think there was a good amount of black cherry in there too. So it's definitely showing that ripeness on here. On the palate, first you get is cherry. The finish, I believe, is like cranberry.
Yeah, definitely some cranberry.
Cranberry on the finish. And really fruit up front, nice crisp cranberry on the end. New Zealand, to get a little bit more ripeness going on here. Cherry and
I just have to say it smells like, so to me, this has a cola aroma, which is vanilla. So it's like cherry cola.
Right. I was telling Shannon that for me, it's just like, that's what Dr. Pepper is.
Right.
Dr. Pepper is like cherry cola with all these other secret little spices and herbs, but it has definitely that cherry cola aspect, which is something that you often see in a little bit warmer climate.
It definitely indicates more ripeness.
Right. And it's definitely much more of a nose thing than it is a palate thing.
Yeah.
So when you get on the palate, it has a touch more concentration on the cherry.
Right. I say cherry, red cherry. I'm not really getting the cranberry.
Not getting the cranberry in. I get maybe a little raspberry, a little strawberry on there. So, but none of the tart fruit on the finish. And so where does this fit in the world of Pinot Noirs? Well, Shannon would say that this Pinot is very much in the style of Burgundy.
Or Alsace. Most people have never tasted a Pinot Noir from Alsace.
But it is. It's great.
It is the red variety of Alsace.
It is. And this Pinot, again, can you definitely find this kind of style in Burgundy, especially if you're going to go to some of the warmer areas. If you head down to like the Chalonnais, they're going to be a little bit riper.
So an interesting thing, that's been going on in France for many years now is in light of the success of wines of the New World, like New Zealand wines and US wines, and the style of being very fruit forward and a little more mouth filling. A lot of the French producers, if the climate allows it, have been slightly changing up the style of their wine to make more of a New World style, even, maybe because maybe they're exporting it to the US and they want it to be more familiar. But if any of you are familiar with classic Burgundian wines, which emphasize the earthiness, I think the Silver Thread is very much in the image of that more traditional Burgundy style, whereas, the New Zealand maybe is more of a
Bourgogne.
right.
Right.
Like
The entry level, like $22. I mean, everything in Burgundy is expensive. So you get your entry level is a nice Bourgogne, which is a general region, and it's definitely going to be more fresh forward, very cherry driven. And neither of these, we didn't even talk about oak yet.
Oh yeah.
Neither of these have actually new oak on that. And so that was the decision based on, that's your MO, is that you don't do.
Right. And you can see, we're right here in the cellar, here's a barrel.
Old barrels back
right
there.
behind us. Usually they have a date on them somewhere. I'm not seeing it on this one, but there's one over there that is from 2013. So that's one of the newest barrels we have. That's 7 years old. So
Right.
all of our barrels are older. We don't have brand new ones.
Right. So which
to
means
age the wine.
And this one was, they said it's a mix of stainless steel and old oak, and in old oak for 10 months. But so neither of them are going to come across as giant vanilla driven wines. Neither of them are going to have any oak tannins, because those are mostly kind of like gotten out of it through that. So they're very soft. Both wines are very soft in the mouth, but both are still expressing a lot of acidity as well.
Right, which is great for cleansing your palate, great for pairing with food. So again, both of these would be great food wines, just like the Rieslings would be.
Exactly, and that's what takes me down to like where this style is much more like a Chardonnay, where they tend to, and a Bourgogne, which they don't use the oak. They keep the price down. They tend to use less new oak, and it's meant for approachable, something you could drink now versus age, And but Pinot Noir is really hard to make, so wherever you're going to get it, it's going to have a price tag on it.
Right, and one of the things I just want to point out about the Silver Thread Pinot Noir, I mentioned before, our site being shallow, rocky soil, really mineral-driven wine. So for me, the finish on the Silver Thread has got this stony mineral character to it. And we do have our vines planted on limestone, a little limestone vein that runs through the vineyard. And I have to give a shout out to Richard Fiegel, who founded Silver Thread, for doing that. The vineyard was already here when my husband and I bought it 10 years ago, versus the New Zealand, where the finish, I'm getting kind of this spicy, toasty, I know it's neutral barrel, but possibly they had a couple barrels a little less neutral than ours, so you are getting a different impression on the finish. Not the minerals, you're getting more this toasty, smoky sort of flavor that lingers there.
Right, and when we did this in person, so again, they're similar. The Pinot Noirs, both driven by cherries, no question. They're both fresh. They're both have a youthful aspect to them. Neither of them are overly earthy like you would get from from a Côte d'Or Pinot Noir. But what makes these different is that, again, the minerality, and remember how everyone was saying the dustiness.
Like a dusty earth.
The dusty earth, which is definitely more Burgundian, while this one has more of that, a little bit of more of that California Willamette cherry cola thing going on, which, and so there's a very, but they have their similarities, but they also kind of lend to their own particular areas, mostly climate.
Right, like
climate
so.
driven.
I mean, if I were trying to pick, like, let's give some food ideas here, right? Because I'm still hungry.
We're both still hungry.
So the Pinot Noir from Silver Thread, I really love with mushrooms. This time of year, I try to cook as much on the grill as possible because I don't want to do the dishes. On a nice summer evening, I want to sit out and finish my wine. So maybe some nice grilled portobello mushrooms with some herbs, some fresh tomato, slices of fresh tomato on top right at the end to match with that bright acidity. And then I would go, maybe for some.
How about a duck confit?
Oh wow. I was gonna say like a chorizo on the grill, like something a little smoky and spicy to go with the New Zealand.
That's a great idea. I'm just thinking, my son.
She happens to live in a house with a chef.
I do live in a house with a chef, and he makes the duck confit, and then he makes a cherry demi-glace.
Oh, nice.
Which would be very nice.
Nice,
right?
Yeah.
That'd be really nice.
You would like that with the New Zealand?
I actually like it with both of them.
With both of them, yeah.
Well, what was really interesting is that the Finger Lakes, because of its acidity, lifts up flavors more. And so when we were doing it live, we had some people had some cheese and they were saying, oh my God, this cheese just pops with the silver thread. And you're getting all of this incredible earthy, some mushroom flavors coming out in the cheese with the New Zealand, it made the cheese actually more creamier. It was like a little bit more integrated, a little bit creamier, but you didn't get that pop.
Right.
And that pop is definitely the wonderful acidity that comes in. And I tell everyone, I think that the best food wines in the world are the Finger Lakes, but maybe I'm biased. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I feel that way too. I know we're definitely both biased because we live here and we promote Finger Lakes wine for our livelihood. So yes, we have learned to, to absolutely like to find the best ways to enjoy Finger Lakes wine and share it with all of you. So I'm sure it's appreciated. But I think this was such a fun tasting because both of the Australia and New Zealand wines are beautiful in and of themselves. And I think what I like about both of them is they're really nicely balanced wines. I mean, they're different than the Finger Lakes. They're really beautiful, really beautiful wines, and I will enjoy drinking both of them.
In fact, we're both going to take a number of bottles.
Yeah, that's the fun part about this. This is great for us to learn some new wines too.
Yeah, and what was most surprising to me is that you're talking about two very different overall climates. You think one describes the Finger Lakes as a cool climate, one describes Australia as a warm, almost hot climate. And so you would expect these wines to be more different than they are similar. I would think in both cases, these wines are more similar than they are different. They definitely seem like they're sisters who have found themselves separated at birth. How about that?
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that would be a great, any of you who are curious what it's like to go to wine school and get a certification like what Laura and I have, they actually make you write papers. And a good topic for a paper might be, what you just said, like, are these wines more alike or are they more different and why? And then you have to write an essay about it. So that's the kind of school I enjoy these days, especially.
That's what I'm going to go home and write an essay right now. It's the best.
That's your homework, everybody. Write an essay, send it in. The winner gets a free virtual tasting the next time we do this.
There you go. Oh, okay. That sounds good to me. I'll do it. I think that'll be great. So if you're so excited about what we have to talk about, it has piqued your interest, you can still get all four of these wines at marketviewliquor.com. And just again, this is Momo Pinot Noir from New Zealand, Marlborough, New Zealand, Alea Riesling from Grosset is Australia.
And this is the Silver Thread Estate Riesling Biointensive 2018 and Silver Thread Pinot Noir 2017. And just be sure in the Riesling that it's the Estate Riesling because we make 5 or 6 different Rieslings and the Market View store.
They're selling dry Riesling there too, right?
They are, yeah. So
sure
you have to, the Estate Riesling. Although the dry Riesling would be a beautiful comparison as well.
It would be lovely.
So the wine,
I don't know what they're talking about. There's many things that Laura and Shannon just described.
It'll be close. But these wines are still available, and if you're coming to the Finger Lakes anytime soon, and you could stop by the winery in person, or if you want to call us, these wines are available here as well. They are in our library right now, which means if you go to our website, you're not going to see them. But if you get in touch with us by phone or come to the winery, then they are available. So.
Right. And when we did this, people enjoyed themselves so much that we, in terms of the morning, so we said we're gonna, and we had really, it's more like we had so much fun, right?
Right.
And so we're going to do it again. We're going to think about around Thanksgiving time. We'll come back, showcase some fun Thanksgiving wines. So maybe we'll bring in some, I don't know, Gewürztraminer, maybe we'll do some Chardonnay. Who knows? We'll see what Shannon has to tell me what's left.
I know. Maybe some sparkling.
Oh, yeah.
Some sparkling.
Always. Yes.
That'd be fun.
Yes. Whatever happens to be left in, that time of year, small boutique winery, their stuff runs out more quickly than they would certainly hope.
Right, these days, yes. But we highly encourage you to visit the Finger Lakes. Laura has an outstanding tour company, Experience the Finger Lakes, that brings you to all the best wineries, including Silver Thread. You can also visit Silver Thread online or on your own to come and taste with us. So we hope you do. And this has been a lot of fun, Laura. Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to you guys. And hopefully we'll see you sometime soon here in the region. Take care.
Bye.